First, I want to take a moment to keep the people from Boston and Waco in our thoughts and prayers. There's this young man, and he was on trial. And the judge was chastising him. He was saying, how can you possibly justify such a heinous crime of killing a California condor? It's an endangered species. There are only 48 of them left in the wild. What could have possibly been going through your mind to allow you to do such a terrible, terrible deed? And the young man looked at the judge and he said, Your Honor, I was lost in the wilderness. And as I was going through some bushes, I fell off this cliff and I landed on a ledge. And I was stuck on that ledge for 7 days and 7 nights with no food, no water. And I guess I looked pretty bad because this giant buzzard landed on top of me and started pecking at me. And with the last ounce of strength in my body, I grabbed a rock, I bashed him in the skull, and I ate him. It was a matter of sustenance. It's a matter of survival. The judge said, well, that's a pretty good explanation. Just out of curiosity, what did it taste like? He said, well, it was kind of a cross between a bald eagle and a spotted owl. A story with a twist, an element of humor to capture your attention, and then the fatal blow. In essence, that's editorial cartooning. When people ask me what is an editorial cartoonist, I always say, well, we're kind of a hybrid. We're a cross between Edward R. Murrow, Ted Koppel, and the Son of Sam. Editorial cartoons are about concept. The illustration is merely a vehicle to convey a point of view. We're here to protect and inform the public, to attack and repel those who do not share our philosophical long-term interests, to track and compel the reader to arms in the battle against the complacent, the lethargic, the evildoers, the sordid predators of society, the champions of status quo, or more commonly known as Congress. Basically, you can see I get paid to be obnoxious. It's the only other profession besides dentistry where you get paid to be obnoxious. Now, politicians think that they're paid to be obnoxious. They're not paid to be, they're just obnoxious. That's why we have editorial cartoonists. It's a profession about ideas. 95% of what I do is concept or pushing a particular point of view. It's an act of journalism. We are the pit bulls of journalism. We're trained to attack at the slightest provocation. We are the prosecution, pushing for a rapid conviction and an immediate execution. We are the defense, punching holes in the arguments raised against our cause. We are judge. We are jury. I'm not a member of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, so you actually can understand my rulings. Now, we stand in judgment over the issues, and the sentence that we levy is swift and harsh. But in order to be judge and jury, one must read and research. So that is one of the things I'm going to advocate for you guys today, is that there's plenty of information out there. There's a great resource of information. It is your duty as a citizen of this democratic republic to be informed. Now, what I do is I start the day at around 5 or 5:30 in the morning. I co-manage the editorial page at Investors Business Daily. And so I read 3 papers a day in my hand and others online. And it gives me a sense of what's on sort of what's being absorbed by the American consciousness. And I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Of course, I read Investors Business Daily, which is the greatest newspaper in the world. A lot of people say the truth lies somewhere between the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Let me tell you, the truth lies in Investors Business Daily. Now, I'm a political analyst. I'm a political wonk. I get paid to read. I read everything I can get my hands on. As a contributor to the Weekly Standard, of course, I read the Standard and I read the National Review, and you're going to have fun with those guys out there. They're great. When I want to laugh, I'll read Mother Jones or The Nation. I think it's important to view the issues on the broadest possible reference plane. In fact, if you firmly believe in any issue, what I urge you to do is read the opposite of it. Most times, it will merely reinforce your original ideas, but on the rare occasion, it might change your mind. Either way, you'll have a larger and more comprehensive view of the issue. I believe it's important to understand all sides of an issue, and that entails knowing the contrary point of view. I'm a firm believer in the statement, know thine enemy. So, what we do is we spend our time gathering information. We process the information to draw a conclusion, to draw a cartoon, and hopefully to draw blood. Now, a reporter's job is to be the purveyor of fact, to point out the injustices of the world, and to shine the hot spotlight of exposure to wound the perpetrators of those injustices with the truth. Editorial cartoonists, we just go back and shoot the wounded. Now, I want to make a distinction here between objective news reporting and the subjective editorial page. It's always hilarious when people call me up and they don't call me Mr. Ramirez, they call me other names, which I won't mention, but they say, you are way too opinionated. And I have to say, well, that's why I'm on the opinion page. Now, I realize these days it's hard to distinguish between the two. The truth is the mainstream media does an awful job. It's why people trust the media less than they do politicians, and we know how much they trust politicians. It's a factor in circulation going down. Now, obviously, there's a convergence of media. When people are relying on the web for information, because the media is so biased, why would anyone want to buy misinformation when real information is readily available on the web for free? There's widespread manipulation going on in the media, and that's one of the subjects I want to cover today. And I've been watching the funeral for Margaret Thatcher, one of the great statesmen of the world. It reminded me of the coverage of the Reagan centennial celebration a couple of years ago. And the media cooed about Reagan's communication skills and his likability. What they glossed over were his achievements. Ronald Reagan was perhaps the greatest president of modern times. And he provides all of us a lesson in presidential leadership. True, it was his oratorical skill that made Reagan such a potent force. But it was his ideas and his unwavering belief in America's greatness that made him great. Now, if you've been to the Reagan Presidential Museum, they have a clip where they show the president hosting a bunch of editorial cartoonists. I was fortunate to be in that audience in the Rose Garden. I had hair back then, so I'm the guy in the second row on the left. But one thing I loved about Ronald Reagan was his great sense of humor. The joke he told us the difference between the United States, a free nation, and the Soviet Union, a communist society where speech is limited. He said the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union is, in the United States, political cartoonists can draw editorial cartoons of the President of the United States. In the Soviet Union, political cartoonists must draw editorial cartoons on the President of the United States. Reagan was essentially an editorial cartoonist, but with words. His jokes were funny, but they always had a cogent point. Take America's Cold War with the Soviet Union. On March 8, 1983, Ronald Reagan declared the Soviet Union the evil empire. The reaction was immediate. A blanket of condemnation rose from political pundits and the mainstream media. Critics in conventional wisdom called Reagan's remarks unpresidential and an abrogation of diplomacy. They characterized him as a doddering old man, barely in charge of his mental faculties, who was unaware of what he was saying, and worse. But in the most remote part of Siberia, deep in the Soviet gulag, in a dark, damp, and dingy cell, a sympathetic guard leaned over to a Soviet dissident, a political prisoner, and quietly whispered between the bars, Ronald Reagan has just called the Soviet Union the evil empire. The whisper hung in the air for a moment. The guard left him in the darkness of his prison cell. Quietly, the metallic sound of a spoon tapped against stone, repeating the news in Morse code, which echoed along the walls of the gulag. Ronald Reagan has called the Soviet Union the evil empire. One spoon tapping out the hopes of those imprisoned in the darkness. One spoon followed by another, echoing against the halls, bursting into a cacophony of defiance. You see, words have meaning. And Reagan's words marked the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. Reagan was a crusader against evil in the world, and he boldly challenged Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall, and the wall fell. But words are only as powerful if they are pursued with meaning, purpose, commitment, and action. The collapse of the Soviet Union was only one facet of Reagan's achievements. And I think his administration could provide many lessons that should be applied today. Let's look at the America Ronald Reagan inherited before his inauguration in January 20, 1981. America was suffering, as we were told by Jimmy Carter, from an economic malaise. And it was all our fault. The misery index, which was employment plus inflation, was above 20%. We had high unemployment, double-digit inflation was 13.3%. Double-digit interest rates, the prime rate was like 21.5%. The soft diplomacy of President Carter's policy of appeasement had severely damaged America's international reputation, and the deep cuts in the military had damaged our defense posture. Iran had taken 66 American hostages. 52 of them remained hostages for 444 days. In the winter of 1979, America had lost faith in itself. Jimmy Carter told us to stop whining and to be more conservative with your energy. In 1980, America took Carter's advice. They became more conservative and elected Ronald Reagan. After 20 minutes after being sworn in, Iran released American hostages. Words have power. Reagan took us from the darkness. He restored funding and established a strong national defense and advocated a diplomatic policy of peace through strength. He pledged to reduce government programs. He pushed a 25% across-the-board cut in income taxes, the largest in history. He stopped apologizing for U.S. wealth and might, and he projected America's greatness. The Economic Recovery Tax Act that Reagan signed in 1981 was the engine for economic growth for over 2 decades. It was completely opposite of what we're doing now. It was a free market economic prescription that created greater incentives for work, investment, and individual achievement that unshackled the American dream. For those who believed it was a windfall for the rich, well, the top 10% were paying 48% of total income taxes in 1981. By 1988, the top 10% were paying 57.2% of total income taxes. But most of all, rather than apologize for America, he made America believe in itself again. It was a uniquely American idea, one that believed the power of the people rather than the power of the government. The power of the people to find the answers to our problems. See, Ronald Reagan believed if government would get out of the way, Americans could provide the solutions. Now, the media tried to make the comparison between Barack Obama and Ronald Reagan, which was interesting as an editorial cartoonist. It provided a lot of fodder. But, you know, it's kind of funny last year as we watched the political campaign, the question was asked, are we better off than 4 years ago? Well, let's see. We have 7.6% unemployment. The CBO projects that'll be 8% this year. The poverty rate has increased from 39.8 million to 46.2 million. That's an increase from 13.2% to 15.7%. Americans on food stamps increased from 31.5 million to 47 million to almost 50 million. The median income has dropped 4.1% during the recovery, or down about $4,000 per family. I mean, I can go on and on with statistics of where this president has gone wrong. But I'm not going to bore you with that. I'm going to bore you with other things. These are all things that the media should have covered, that you should be aware of, that you need to be informed of as an active constituent in a democratic republic. You know, at CPAC, I mentioned a bunch of headlines that the media has virtually ignored. The Fast and Furious lies, the national intelligence leaks, Bain Capital outsourcing lies, the truth about Joe Sopcich, and Obamacare is not a tax. Obamacare will never increase the debt by one dime, either now or in the future. Obamacare will reduce your premiums by $2,500. The Obama administration is responsible for increased oil production on federal land. Solyndra was not our program, per se. Shovel-ready jobs. It was shovel-ready, of course. These are all things you should have heard from the media, but it doesn't fit into their agenda. Newspapers and the media have an obligation to give you the truth. Not a filtered version of the truth, not a politically correct version of the truth, but simply the truth. We're all human beings, and most journalists are as well. Therefore, they will undoubtedly have their own interpretation of events. But that's what makes it so important to cover an issue in its entirety. Differing perceptions can easily color an issue. Let me give you an example. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson were out camping. As they laid down to sleep, Holmes turned to Watson. He said, "Watson, look up into the sky and tell me what you see." And Watson thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Well, I see millions and millions of stars." And Holmes said, "Well, what does that tell you?" And Watson said, "Well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies, potentially billions of planets. Theologically, it tells me there must be a God to create something so magnificent. And God is great, and we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, well, it tells me it's a clear evening sky tonight. It'll probably be a beautiful day tomorrow." And Watson turned to Holmes and he asked him, "What does it tell you?" And Holmes looked up and he said, "Somebody stole our tent." We have a participatory democratic republic, the best system of government in the world. Truly a government of the people and by the people and for the people, but only if the people participate. That's your job. Let me tell you another story. This is one of my favorite stories. There's this duck, and it waddled into the store. I went up to the manager and said, "Got any grapes?" The manager looked at the duck and he said, "No, we have no grapes." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager looks at the duck and he goes, "No, I have no grapes." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager looks at the duck and he goes, "Look, duck, I have no grapes. I have no fruit section. I will never have grapes." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager goes, "Look, I don't have grapes. I will never have grapes. I hate grapes. I hate ducks. Get out of my store." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, the duck comes waddling in, and the manager goes, "Hold it right there, duck. If you ask me for grapes one more time, I'm going to nail your little web feet to the floor. Ask me for anything else. Do not ask me for grapes." The duck looks at him and says, "Got any nails?" He says, "No." "Got any grapes?" This joke provides a good working analogy of how I view Washington bureaucracies at work. Because you see, in Washington, D.C., things are not always represented as they truly are. For example, a slower increase in Medicare payments is not called a rational effort to save Medicare. It's called a draconian cut. A balanced budget amendment, which stipulates Congress can only spend the amount of money that they take in, is not called common sense. It's called extremism. Making illegal immigration illegal is not called following the law. It's called insensitivity. Judging someone not by the content of their character, but strictly by the color of their skin, is not called racism. It's called affirmative action. Aborting a human fetus in its third trimester is not called killing. It's called a choice. And a tax is no longer a tax. It's called an investment in America. No, I think Vice President Biden called it patriotism. The battle our brave soldiers have undertaken against terrorists and Islamic extremism is no longer called a war on terror. It's called an overseas contingency operation. Our Deputy National Intelligence Security Advisor, or former Deputy National Intelligence Security Advisor for Counterterrorism, who's now the director of the CIA, John Brennan, called jihad a legitimate tenet of Islam, further arguing that the term jihadist should not be used to describe America's enemies, but that's how they describe themselves. Our president's nominee for the Secretary of State believes that American soldiers should be called war criminals. The Secretary of Defense, who was opposed to sanctions on Iran and voted against calling the Iranian Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization, wants to gut our military. And the new National Security Strategy document drops the term Islamic extremism from its lexicon completely. James Clapper testified that the Muslim Brotherhood is a largely secular group which has eschewed violence. It's called the Muslim Brotherhood. It has the word Muslim in its name. And blowing up buildings is no longer called terrorism. It's called a man-caused disaster. Well, let me tell you something. Frankly, I think this administration has been a man-caused disaster. And I don't know about you, but I believe in the old adage, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, then it's usually a duck. As an editorial cartoonist, it's my job to nail that duck to the floor. Because people need to watch over the Institution for the Intellectually Challenged, Congress, on behalf of the American public. You see, politicians often forget who they work for. Because of the pomp and circumstance that surrounds these career political celebrities, we're lulled into thinking it is we who work for them. It is the opposite. It is in our Constitution. It is they who work for you. Do not forget that. The problem with this country isn't that we pay too little in taxes. It's that we support a government that's gotten too big and too intrusive. Our country was built around the idea of self-governance and independence. But 39% of Americans are on some kind of government program. 1 in 6 Americans are on direct government assistance. 50% of Americans do not pay federal taxes. In the last election, we had less than 58% turnout of all registered voters. If you took the real numbers of all the eligible electorate, less than a third, 29% voted for the president of the most powerful country in the world. Is this America you want? It certainly isn't the America that Ronald Reagan envisioned. It's amazing when you look back into history at a small group of colonists united to fight taxation without representation. It's clearly evident now that we face the same challenge. This is a nation founded on the principles of limited government, individual liberty, self-responsibility, and a strong national defense. It's time to return to our historical and constitutional framework. In past presidential terms, I think hold the key to future presidential successes. George Washington once said, "Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is a force, like a fire. It is a dangerous servant and a fearful master." Calvin Coolidge, John F. Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan found the solution to our economic problems rested not in the government, but in the ingenuity of the people. They believed in the doctrine of American exceptionalism. In their eyes, America was a place where the extraordinary could be extraordinary and be rewarded for their successes. In turn, their success would create innovation and jobs that benefited the average American and give those average Americans incentives to work hard, to dream, to become extraordinary themselves, so that others could simply remain as community organizers. President Kennedy believed in an America that could reach for the moon, not reach for the taxpayer's wallet. President Obama said, "It's time for America to rise to its challenge when the Russians beat us into space with Sputnik. And I'm going to do that by canceling our manned space program. It takes more than words and a good speech to make a great president. It takes great ideas. America is a great idea. Reagan was an exceptional president because he truly believed America was an exceptional country. Ronald Reagan saw America as the shining city on the hill, not just a city among many, many other cities. It might be wise to look at the past to determine our future. I'm going to try to encourage you by showing you some cartoons. Can you bring that handheld mic up when you have a chance? I'm a capitalist pig, so buy my book. Next. Oh, and you can find the best editorial page at investors.com and /cartoons. Next. This is actually the name of my new book, Give Me Liberty or Give Me Obamacare, and I'm going to show some cartoons from that first. Next. I've now been in 57 states. I think one left to go. President Barack Obama in Beaverton, Oregon, May 9th, 2008. Next. This is a cartoon I just did on the Boston terror attack. Terrorism is the last refuge of a coward. Next. The Fat Man and the Little Boy, War in North Korea. Trust me. It's a historical reference to the nuclear program during World War II. Next. Give me liberty or give me a government bailout. These are the choices we face, and you face for generations to follow. Look, right now here's the young Barack Obama, and all the solutions are government. Right now, we're in line to get a debt of $20 trillion, probably by the end of President Obama's term. That means a multi-generational debt. If you take $20 trillion, some wise man told me once, if you pay it off at $1 a second, it'll only take 670,000 years to pay it off. Next. He certainly has a lot of Secret Service for protection. Those are journalists. Next. Well, the letter of intent, from a nation of achievement to a nation of entitlement. Next. Limited government, you bunch of extremists. Made in China. Relax, I'm only going to hit the upper 2% of his body. I'm okay, I landed on a taxpayer. Attention everyone, as you go into battle, the most important thing for you to know is, Jones here is gay. The hitchhiker. How's the green economy thing working for you? The Mad Hatter, we have to pass this bill so that you can find out what's in it, and this is the most ethical Congress ever. You didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. King George III built the roads. The lapdog. What do you call doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results? California. I will have the most open and transparent administration ever. And hold it. Can you go back to that for a second? If you look at my cartoons, you'll notice that all the pictures in the back are of his loved ones. And, of course, they're all of President Obama. Next. We, the government. Someday all this will be yours. Now, here's a picture of Bill Clinton looking over the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. This is why I love my job. Next. If you're reading the copy, it says President Clinton looks into binoculars which still have the lens caps on. Next. I'm an equal opportunity offender. Next. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Aristotle. Next. It depends on what the meaning of is. William Jefferson Clinton. This is from the '94 Pulitzer collection. This is on U.S.-Japan trade. Aren't they supposed to face you when they bow? The liberal Catholics, in light of the modernization of society, we'd like to renegotiate the 10 Commandments down to 4.5. Moral values, if it were not for reporters, I would tell you the truth, Chester Arthur. Our moral fabric. Now, this is a perfect example of a really good editorial cartoon. When you think about it, advertisers use images to sell products. Editorial cartoonists use images to sell ideas. And the more concise you can make it, the more effective a vehicle it is. Next. Father, you can't say prayers during graduation ceremonies, but if you print them on condoms, we'd be happy to distribute them. What I wanted to do on Father's Day, meet my father. Here's a black man with a black kid, a white man with a white kid. The black man's thinking white, the white man's thinking black. The kids are going, look, another kid. This is without parental supervision, the kids sliding into gangs. You two here to be married? Yes. Well, step up and be counted. Why society would try to impose its moral values on you is beyond me. It's perfectly natural for two people in love to get married. Your father should be proud of you. He is my father. Governor Elliot Spitzer. Next. Hollywood. You can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. Abraham Lincoln. Next. In ancient times, people worshiped the stars out of ignorance. I got to tell you, I don't understand this whole Kardashian thing. I just don't get it. Next. Who would callously glamorize drugs and tobacco just for profit? Hollywood. Son, your father and I decided not to let you watch television anymore because it promotes violence. Touch my remote and I'll kill you. Just remember when Michael Jackson held his kid over the banister? This is what the kid was thinking. Michael Jackson's my father. Oh, please let go. Next. Here's his sister, Janet. Today on Martha Stewart Living, I'll be demonstrating how to cook your own goose. Junior, it's time to take your Lipitor. Not now, Mom. I'm playing baseball. The voyeur, watching reality TV. I'm not just a reader of the news. Pause next paragraph. Domestic affairs. A government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take from you everything you have. Gerald Ford. Next. Marlboro country. Because of the soaring cost of medical malpractice insurance, we don't have any doctors left. However, rest assured, we have the best lawyers operating on you today. Don't ask, don't ask, don't ask. Affirmative action. Peeking out from underneath the blindfold. Next. These are all the people that have died from tobacco-related diseases. Ed Sullivan. Do cell phones distract you? Can I call you back? Now, this is when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against a Pledge of Allegiance. Bryson Boba the Clown was all booked up, so we got the next best thing. Are you really from the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? Viva Bilingual Education. And here to share his personal success story through bilingual education is Miguel. Okay? You know, we need better immigration laws. Well, profiling's politically incorrect. Besides, they pose no real threat to us. Well, you have a slight temperature. We're not sure why. So we're going to have to amputate your legs. Social Security and Medicare, they constitute $80 to $110 trillion of unfunded liabilities today. Next. He's got a witch doctor. I was kind of hoping for a regular doctor. Well, we have to pay for this health care bill somehow. Next. Freeze. Homicide, burglary, worse. Trans fat. Raise your hands and step away from the chicken. Here's Barry Bonds trying to fill Babe Ruth's shoes, proving that steroids do not make you bigger. Next. This is the U.S. border fence with the service entrance. The business of America is business. Calvin Coolidge, one of my favorite presidents. Saving Social Security. Well, don't just sit there. Pay the man.
Unintended consequences. The price of corn, $6.39. Corn is a staple that they use to feed the hungry throughout the world. You use it for ethanol, you raise the price of corn. Next. How electric cars work. You got to plug them into somewhere. I wish we had free medical care like in Cuba. I wish we had good medical care like in the United States. Drilling in Anwar, 1980, will not help right now, 85. Even if we started 90, drilling today, 95. That oil, 2000, wouldn't come online, 2002. For many, 2004. Many years, 2008. Next. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is a force like fire. It is a dangerous servant and a fearful master, George Washington. Now, these were the Clinton years, my favorite years. This is the Lincoln bedroom. I figured they should just charge by the minute instead of by the night. This is the stain on the presidency. I did not have factual relations with the American people. Here's Buddy at the vet, like I'm the one who needs to be neutered. And the president, only president held in contempt. And the Clinton autobiography with the pullout, I think that's Miss July. And here's the U.S. Senate, Republicans at the trough, at the feeding trough. And there was a discussion whether the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, should get her own form of transportation. I thought she already had it. And President Jimmy Carter. That was anatomically correct, by the way. Election. Nothing brings out the lower traits of human nature like office seeking. Rutherford B. Hayes. Next. Departing of the GOP with John McCain. Here's Al Gore when he was running for president. He's the guy way in the back. Thank you for your answer, Senator Kerry. The many positions of John Kerry. Kerry Sutra. Is there anything in the wardrobe to make him look thinner? And the answer to the elections, Ronald Reagan 100 times. Next. Dennis Kucinich, of course they've seen a UFO. How do you think I got here? And Hillary Clinton, don't worry, I have experience. I'm not a surgeon, but I was married to one for 8 years. My friend Fred Thompson, I announced my candidacy for president of the United States. I quit. Obama's rhetoric, Obama's policies. John McCain, I can reach across the aisle to Democrats, Republicans. Here's Obama having thrown 90 buckets of water on Hillary Clinton, but she just will not go away. We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around, and that makes us special among the nations of the earth. Ronald Reagan. Next. We can expect an extremely hostile response, heavy fire and lots of resistance, and keep your head down and stick to your guns. What about our allies? Those are our allies. Next. In Cuba, yes, Elian, someday all this will be yours. Let me tell you a quick story about, I went down to Cuba with PBS and tried to get arrested on the streets of Havana. I got to interview the Interior Minister, and I asked him about the Brothers in Arms flights and, the political prisoners, and he refused to answer all my questions. So I got exacerbated, and I just finally said, look, I'll just ask you one last question, because it's obvious you're not going to answer any of my questions. And they zoomed the camera in on his face, and I said, in Cuba, I talked to your editorial cartoonist, they cannot draw Che Guevara or Fidel Castro. The journalists have to go through a political panel and an editorial board to get their stuff in print and grandma. I say, in America, we believe that a country that can't make fun of its leaders is a country that's usually imprisoned by its leaders. So let me ask you this one last question. And they zoomed the camera in on his face, and I said, what's your favorite Fidel Castro joke? And his face just went white. And little beads of sweat started gathering on his forehead, and he sat there in silence for a minute, which is an eternity on television. And he finally said, I don't know one, but I'll tell you one later. Next. Is Russia reverting back to Soviet-style oppression? You're darn Putin. Chinese intelligence versus American intelligence. Chinese intelligence, we located the U.S. miniaturization blueprints for the W-88 nuclear warhead. and all its design specs, American intelligence. We found the Chinese embassy on a map. Now, this is the former Korean leader playing with matches. Next. The United Nations, oh, and give me my allowance. Fidel, but it's still burning away. Next. This is the evil and mini evil Chavez. Next. Putin, what's the matter? Never seen a dolphin before? Next. Can you get the UN to debate for a couple more weeks? Next. Iran, exporting terrorism. Next. The Middle East, if civilizations to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of peoples of all kinds to live together in the same world of peace. FDR. This is the Intifada. We're going to skip through these. Why don't we skip these right here? September 11th. This is the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Thomas Jefferson. This is the cartoon I did on 9/11. The lack of coordination between intelligence resources. I got it. Frankly, I can't think of a bigger threat to America than the assault on our civil liberties. This moment must never be forgotten. Hey, dudes, what's up? Can you believe it took me 2 hours to get through airport security, sneaking Patriot Act? Next. You had to say you would do anything to feel safer. War, I never saw a pessimistic general win a battle, Dwight D. Eisenhower. It's my favorite pre-war cartoon. Here's Saddam Hussein at the psychic. She's looking in the ball saying, run. And, I visited Baghdad. I went to go visit the troops out there. I went to the Ba'athist headquarters. And each city had a Ba'athist headquarters. They had a communal pool, but they never used it for swimming. They used it to torture people. You can still see the blood stains in the pool. And we missed ending the war in the first 15 minutes of the war. Apparently, the Ba'athist leaders, including Saddam, were meeting in the Ba'athist headquarters when the first missile strikes hit. They were watching a screening of Pretty Woman. And Saddam just happened to be late. And his car was just coming around the bend when the missile struck, and then you didn't see him until the Spider Hall. The media, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Is it over? Have they won? Are we there yet? Next. It's totally unrealistic to turn over power to the Iraqis in 30 days. The French ambassador, why we turned over our government to the Nazis in under 30 days. Next. Gotcha. Next. The standing ovation. The case against Saddam. 50,000 more reasons why the world is better off without Saddam Hussein. Next. Harry Reid, cut that out. Next. Getting bin Laden. We're going to go over these, and then I'll do a quick wrap-up. Oh, wait. Can you go back a couple? One more. Get to the Hillary one. Oh, we'll just start there. This is I have no idea what it is, but I feel strangely attracted to. When I was looking at the Moab statues in Easter Island, it just reminded me of President Obama. Next. I looked the man in the eye. I was able to get a sense of his soul. Bush on Putin. Unfortunately, he was wearing contacts that day. Whatever the cost may be, we shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Winston Churchill. Harry Reid. Run away. Next. Saving Social Security. Next. Excuse me, but I'm going to need that corn to run my car. The Great Wall between product safety inspections and factories in China. Hillary Clinton, I pledge no more personal attacks on my drug-addicted, possibly Muslim opponent. The heroes in the California fires. The CBS anchor. Ahmadinejad giving a speech at the UN on the coffin of an American soldier. Next. Hugo Chavez striking hammers and sickles. This is when, I think it was Cameron Diaz, went down to Peru with a Mao bag, not knowing that the Shining Path had a civil war that resulted in 70,000 deaths. But each one of these things have meaning. These Che Guevara T-shirts that the younger generation likes. Che killed 12 people himself and was in charge of La Cabana prison. and you go through the litany of these historical things, the USSR, China. Read the history, find out what these things mean. It's important. Next. For the last time, if you don't tell us where you planted the nuclear device, we'll have no choice but to appoint a lawyer for you. Next. The difference between the ATM and the AMT. And we'll stop here. Meet Sheryl Crow. She uses only 1 square of toilet paper per bathroom visit to fight global warming. And that's actually what she said. And so the guy's putting his hand out, looking at her hand, going, no thanks. I'm going to I'll do a quick wrap up here because I know we're running a little bit long. You know, once again, we've been attacked by the forces of evil. But these attacks are in vain. Because America is more than just a standing edifice of iron and steel, concrete. America is an idea. It lives in the hearts and minds of all Americans. It is a cause. It is real. And it's in each and every American, and no amount of explosives will bring it down. As we inaugurate this new century, a century of invention, a century of innovation, and amazing discovery, of new threats and old, as we embark upon a journey toward transforming the world into a brand new paradigm, we face a far more difficult task, transforming into a world of peace and prosperity. But I'd like to challenge you to assist in this metamorphosis. Become informed. I challenge you to appreciate your loved ones, because time is fleeting and you only have them for a short while. I challenge you to treat everyone with respect in the manner that you two want to be treated, unless, of course, you're an editorial cartoonist. I challenge you to have the courage to succeed, to be the best in whatever you endeavor to do, because that is the American way. I challenge you to have the courage to go on with your daily lives, but appreciate all the facets of life that truly enrich it and make this a better world. I challenge you to be involved, to guarantee the liberty and freedom that we often take for granted, that so many have died to preserve. And America is a place where you can do this. America is a place where you have the freedom to succeed. America is a place where you can aspire to do anything, and you have the freedom and the opportunity to accomplish your dreams if you have the will, the courage, the dedication, and the desire to do it. You're only truly limited by the boundaries of your imagination, because America is a land where dreams come true. And once again, we've been challenged by the forces of evil. There's a high price for freedom. But it's not in the nature of America to run from adversity. Americans will risk their lives for a great cause, and America is a great cause. For the principles of liberty and justice for all, and the freedom and in the courage of our convictions, our nation will rise to the challenge, because that is the spirit of America. You see, Mr. President, you're wrong. America is not just one country among many, many countries. America is not a nation of entitlement. America is a nation of achievement. America is a nation of exceptionalism. I am not ashamed to say it, nor do I feel the need to apologize for it. Mr. President, America is the greatest country in the world. Now, it is the dream of our founding fathers, endowed upon us by our Creator. It is the dream of freedom and liberty and justice for all. It is the dream that Ronald Reagan believed in, and that dream is called America. God bless America, and God bless you all. Thank you.
And I twisted. I'm learning. A couple more years of this, and I may have learned, but it's too late. Couple of questions, especially about your drawing. How do you usually start with your cartoons? Do you think of visual elements first, or do you think of the captions and the thought, and then develop an image that goes with it?
The genesis
Give
is
an
really,
example, please.
Yeah, the genesis really is in the accumulation of information and researching the news every day, and then I find the injustice of the day, and like you're writing a thesis paper, it becomes a hypothesis. That hypothesis is structured into what the message is that I want to deliver, and from that point on, usually I'll think of 5 or 6 different ideas on one subject. One of them in my mind, and ironically enough, I don't like to draw. The images in my mind are so much better than the images that come out. Yeah. And so I draw directly from what I see in my mind's eye, and they never come out nearly as good. But also let me say that one thing I do too is I fight the impulse to react to events, because you have to carefully deliberate over these subject matters. I've got 454 papers, I think, in my syndication. And so if I get something wrong, I'm already hated around the world, but I'll be wrong around the world. And so I'm very careful in constructing the ideas. Who was the O.J. Simpson lawyer? Johnny Cochran. When Johnny Cochran, let me give you an example. When Johnny Cochran died, my first impulse was to have Johnny Cochran in heaven, and St. Peter was saying, "I'm sorry, Johnny, if the halo don't fit, we don't admit." Now, it was a great characterization. He had obviously gotten a murder off. But when I went back and I researched Cochran's career, he was very charitable. He had done some very great things. And it just seemed to me that it was unfair to characterize this man from this one thing that he did. Another example would be when the Challenger exploded. There were a lot of rumors circulating around the fact that the NASA budget cuts had really eaten into the safety and development of the programs. My initial idea was to have the pieces of the Challenger scattered through the sky, and out of one of the pieces it was saying, "Boy, these NASA cutbacks are killing us." But you had 7 American heroes, and it was unfair to characterize them as debris. So, I mean, you really think about these. You think about what you're saying, the exactness of what you're saying, and usually the one that speaks most concisely becomes a cartoon.
Well, that leads me to my question. It's a personal one, watching the slides and having looked at your books. By the way, he's going to be signing some books when we're done here, back in that corner. Thank you for doing that. The Babe Ruth, Barry Bonds cartoon, you noted that. I mean, that had to do with Barry Bonds taking enhancement steroids. Now, that's a tremendous cartoon, if I may say so, because it's clear. First sight, it's immediately clear. How did it come to you?
I'm a very, very twisted individual. These ideas sort of run through my brain. I just love to read everything I get my hands on, and literary works as well. And that's a common literary metaphor, filling your parents' shoes. I think that's how that came about. And so I'll grasp at everything to lead to a cartoon idea. In fact, all the people that stood up earlier, I've memorized all your faces just in case you get into politics in the future.
So are you saying to the Babe Ruth shoes, that Babe Ruth just sort of entered your mind like an insight? Or were you looking at lists of other baseball players that may have been great at one time to whom Barry Bonds had been compared?
Yeah. To me, Babe Ruth represented the epitome of success in baseball. So I thought he was a perfect figure. And it's a figure that, one thing you have to do with these political cartoons is they're based on knowledge that people have. So there are some complex issues that I'd love to comment on, but the major media doesn't cover them. You can't really explain it all in one window. So I have to sort of pass on it. But, the reason why I watch I watch television news every half hour in the morning when I wake up at 5:30, is to see what the American consciousness is seeing so that they can relate to what I'm saying. Because if I make an image that is so inside baseball, so to speak, people will not get it at all. And then I lose the opportunity of being a voice. So, I try to use themes that people are familiar with. And, it works too, because generationally, I think you guys have different ideas than we do. You probably don't even know what Gilligan's Island is.
Do you have deadlines as a cartoonist, and have you ever not met them? Or are deadlines helpful to you or a hindrance to your creativity?
I got a deadline in an hour and a half at this Ashbrook place that... Now, the fortunate part of it is, and I've only missed one deadline. I actually didn't miss the deadline. I got a cartoon canned. But I'll get into that in a second. Fortunately, as co-manager of the editorial page at IBD, I get to assign myself space. So if I want the day off, I take the day off. But I only have to do four cartoons a week for IBD, but I usually do 5. And then I'll do 1 for the Weekly Standard. My problem isn't having enough ideas. I got a billion of them. It's just drawing them. It's just such a laborious thing. It never comes out the way I want it. If I could have somebody else draw them, I could do 20 cartoons a week. Narrowing it down to 1 is very, very difficult. But the one cartoon deadline that I missed was we had a transition at the paper I worked for, the Memphis Commercial Appeal, when I was working in Memphis, Tennessee, and USA Today. And Lionel Linder, who was a great conservative editor, hired me at the Commercial Appeal and forced me to go to Memphis, Tennessee. And I got to tell you, the surfing in Memphis stinks. But Lionel was unfortunately killed in a traffic accident on New Year's Eve day. So we got a new editor from the Pittsburgh Gazette, Angus McCarran. And Angus was known as this kind of progressive fire eater. And there were rumors all abound that the first thing he was going to do is, get rid of me. And we literally had politicians lined up in his office every day for a month and a half trying to get me fired. And the first week that he was actually on as editor, it was on a Wednesday, he canned a cartoon, and it was on a work fair. And so I had this Uncle Sam guy sitting in this alley, looking kind of a homeless alcoholic guy. And he's holding up a newspaper that says work fair on it. And he's turning to the guy next to him, and he says, he's holding up a sign that says, we'll work for food. And then he's turning to the guy next to him, he's saying, you mean they actually want us to work? And Angus thought that was insensitive, and he canned it. But he was just actually exerting his power over me as the new editor. And boy, we got into a big fight over it, and I refused to do another cartoon that day. And I said, you may not run that, but it's going to run in 400 other papers. And he said, that's fine, but it's not going to run in our paper. And so, finally, at the end of the week, I asked for a meeting with him. And my friends had warned me, there's a rumor going around that the Pittsburgh Gazette cartoonist was going to replace me. But he called me up. He's a friend of mine. And to reassure me, he said, don't worry, Michael. I would never work for that big jerk ever again. And I go, thanks, Rob. I feel a lot better. So I made a meeting with Angus, and on Friday I said, look, I'm a political cartoonist. I'm an editorialist. I'm not an illustrator. If you want somebody who's going to draw what you want, then you should fire me, and you should do it now. Because I'm not going to do it. You got 9 people here that can draw better than I do, and my job is to come up with the ideas. It has my name on it. So if you're going to fire me right now. And he just laughed, and he said, no, I just, you can do whatever you want. And I said, great. If you keep me on, I'll win you a Pulitzer, and the next year I won. So.
One more, if you don't mind. There's a series of these that I'll just try to wrap up in my own voice that has to do, in fact, with what you've already said about a surprising thing, I think, to not only me, that that you like thinking about what you're going to draw, and the drawing is secondary to it. I think if I may say so, I'm surprised by that. I'm shocked by that. I thought that people who did this for a living did it because they like to draw. And it turns out that the idea is much more important than the technique of carrying the idea out in an illustration. When did you first start thinking about this, or a series of questions? At what age? 3, 5, 7?
That's a good question. I was just telling our table that I've got 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and they're all doctors, and their spouses are doctors. So I'm the black sheep of the family. And when I go to family reunions, I have to tell people, well, when you think about the material I deal with, I'm sort of like a proctologist, so I can fit in. I never intended to be a political cartoonist, ever. The thought never crossed my mind. I graduated from UCI. I was triple major biological science, fine arts, studio painting, and art history. And the only reason why I did the latter two was because medical schools were looking for more well-rounded students. And so I figured that would help me out. Now, there's always a devious scheme somewhere in the background. In high school, which you guys should take advantage of this, in my high school we had a closed campus, which meant you could not leave the campus unless, 2 things, unless you had an office pass or if you had a press pass. And the person in charge of the press pass was the student editor, not the teacher. And so when the waves got over 5 foot, I had to go to the beach and investigate it thoroughly and write stories about it. So I was the editor of my student paper. I also found out, being from Southern California, that if you wrote to producers, you could get free concert tickets and free movie tickets, and you could go to premieres and see stars. And boy, you go to the concerts, 10th row, 2 seats right in the middle. So if you work for your student paper, start writing to producers. So I did that. Now, when I went into college, I continued to do that in my college newspaper, The New University. And I continued to write, reviews on movies and concerts, and I wrote editorials. Because I've grown up reading the paper with my dad since I was a little kid. I was always involved in politics, or at least the political discussion aspect of it. One day, I was carrying a painting that I was working on into the newsroom, and I was filing a story. And my editor said, I didn't know you could draw. Why don't you do a cartoon on the student election? And I said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. I love political cartoons. I grew up with Jeff McNally in the Orange County Register and Paul Conrad on the other side, both brilliant political cartoonists. And so I did this cartoon on the student election, and we had 3 days worth of protests over this cartoon. I had written these hard-hitting editorials that I thought just killed the people that were the topic, and they had no effect whatsoever. You draw one cartoon, everybody hates you. What a great forum. I got called in front of the student government to apologize to the school because I needed to be educated. And in my defense, I stood up and said, you're absolutely right, which is why I'm going to school, but thank you for your concern, and I left. And even then, I didn't fall in love with political cartoons. It was just something fun to do on the side. Gave me a little notoriety. Then in my junior year, I got hired by a local newspaper, the Newport Ensign, about 2 months after my first cartoon. And so it used to be in between organic chemistry and bio 101, I had a 2-hour gap, and I'd go down to the beach and go surfing. And the Newport Ensign was just along the way. I could whip out a cartoon. It cost $50. I mean, it made me $50, and it was a good deal all around. My junior year, we had an incident where this guy got pulled over by the Newport Beach police. He was arrested for drunk driving, and they kind of roughed him up a little bit, threw him on the hood of their police car, didn't allow him a phone call. It turned out he was a Newport City councilman who didn't drink. And so I drew this cartoon where I had this guy hogtied on the hood of a police car with his shoe wedged in his mouth. And the arresting officer was explaining to the sergeant I was simply reinforcing his constitutional right to remain silent. And, man, that just blew up. Everybody in Newport was mad at me. The police chief came down. He yelled at the publisher. He yelled at the editor. And then he yelled at me, and he tried to find out where I lived. And it suddenly dawned on me, what a profound impact these drawings have. I think it was then and there that I fell in love with it. In fact, I gave a speech in Chicago, and somebody asked me, he said, do you get death threats? And what was the first death threat you ever got? And of course, I get death threats all the time. But I told my mom to stop calling me at the office. But no. At the LA Times, I had Conrad's old office. So I had a wall that was 3 layers deep of death threats. I mean, some of them you have to report to the police because they actually cut out the letters and they glue them together. It's hilarious. And people think it makes me mad. I love them. I show them to my colleagues. But the first death threat I got was when I graduated from college. I went up to my parents and said, I'm going to take a year off from medical school to be a political cartoonist, and my parents threatened to kill me. And so I figure, since President Obama won a Nobel Prize for doing nothing, I should get a Nobel Prize for all the lives I saved by not being a cardiovascular surgeon, which is what I wanted to be.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.